So today what we're going to look at is how you find the slope of a line. And a basic definition of slope is how steep something is. And there's going to be two formulas that you're going to need to learn for this section that aren't on the SOL. One of them is rise over run, and the other one is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now I tend to use these differently depending on what I'm being asked to find. If I'm given a picture like this, then I tend to use the first formula. If I'm given a set of coordinates like this, then I tend to use the second one. Now when we do rise over run, I've put an arrow here just to remind you which direction that's going to be. So when we're talking about rise, we're talking about going upwards, and very importantly the run always has to be to the right. Now we can actually count downwards for rise, and if we do that we give it a negative number, and we'll look more about that in a later video. So if I was given 2 points like this, and actually if you check here you can see that I plotted -1, -3, and I also plotted 3, 5. So I'm actually going to do this question in two different ways. So if I'm given these points here, I need to know how many squares I need to go up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I stop once I'm level with the dot, so that was 8. And then count how many squares you go to the right, which is 4. And then you divide those two numbers. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. And that's how you find the slope, just by counting to different points. Now, you don't have to choose those specific points. You can pick any points that you like that lie on the line, and that would also work. So if I was to choose this point and this point, I would go up 4 squares, and then across 2 squares, and 4 divided by 2 is also 2. And I could have picked another 2 different squares. I could have gone here and here as well. If I just go up 2 squares and then across 1 square, then 2 over 1 is 2. Now actually the easiest way to find slope is if you can actually do that. If you can just go across one single square and see how many squares you go up, that's actually going to be the slope, because anything divided by 1 is the top number. So if I look here, if I go just across 1 square, you can see that I go up 2 whole squares, so that would be the slope. Now that's not always going to work because we might end up with fractional answers, but it is a quick check that you can do. Now if I'm given coordinates, and we already know the answer is 2, but just to show you how you do this longhand, first thing you should do is label the coordinates. So the first coordinate is the x coordinate, and as this is my first coordinate I call it x1. This is my y coordinate, as it's my first coordinate I call it y1. And then for similar reasons, I label the other coordinate as x2 and y2. A lot of people skip this step, and a lot of people make mistakes because of that. So don't skip that step out. And then on the next part, what we do is you're going to use this formula here. And I would recommend that you write out this formula, which is something I didn't do on this one. And then plug in the numbers. So look, what is y2? Well, y2 is 5. What is y1? y1 is -3. Now I put parentheses around here to show that you're subtracting something that's negative to make sure we don't make any careless mistakes. And then did the same for x2. x2 was 3 and x1 was -1, and you can see below from that calculation, if you work that out you end up with the same answer. Now in relation to slopes, there are different types of slopes that you need to be aware of. So you can have positive slopes and you can have negative slopes. And as you can see from the slide here, positive slopes go from bottom left to top right, which is like this. Negative slopes go from top left to bottom right, like this. Now you can find the slope from this as well using these dots. I can pick any 2 of these dots, but if I go up 1, go across 1, 1 over 1 would be 1. Or I could actually just write physically down what are these coordinates. 1, 2. And this one was 2, 3, and then use that formula I showed you on the previous page. If I was to do it for this one, now this time I'm not going to rise because that takes me away from the line. I would want to go down 1 across 1. To show that I went down 1, I put -1 for my rise, and a -1 over 1 is -1. Or I could do the same thing. I could take these 2 points, -2, 4, and -1, 3. And I could apply that formula that we saw on the previous page. You can also have slopes that are fractional. So I chose one that was positive and one that was negative. And as this is a graph, I'm going to use my rise over run. So I go up 2 squares, and then I go across 6 squares. So 2 over 6, and then if possible simplify. So that one has a slope of 1 over 3. One more way you can check that it's 1 over 3 is you can also see that it goes up 1 and across 3, and I get back to the line. If I do my second one, this time I've got to go down. So I'll go down 4 and then across 6. As I went down, I'm going to give the rise a negative number. So negative 4 over 6, or if I simplify here, negative 2 over 3. And if I'd have actually started from this point, then you can see I go down 2, across 3, and I get the same answer. So remember, when you're finding slope, you can use any 2 points that you like on the line, and if they're closer together, that actually means you've got a little bit less counting to do. 2 special ones are the ones that are vertical lines and horizontal lines. And we can go ahead and write down these coordinates here. So this one is 3, 1, and this is 3, 4. And then now I can plug those numbers into the formula. So y2 is 4, y1 is 1, x2 is 3, and x1 is 3. So 4 take away 1 is 3, 3 take away 3 is 0. Now, if you work out 3 divided by 0 on the Casio, it's going to say math error. And if it says math error, then that means it's not actually a number. And we can't actually work out an answer to that question, so we're going to say it's undefined. In other words, it's not defined, there's no number we can physically give it. And that's the only line where that's going to happen. Every other line, you're going to get a number for the slope. When you see a vertical line, though, you're going to get this undefined. Now, also as a reminder, x equals 3 is a vertical line. We talked about this in one of the previous lessons. And this is one you should certainly remember. So if you see what is the slope of x equals 3, you'll think vertical line, and then you'll think undefined. Now, if I do the one for the horizontal line, I have negative 3, 2. And I also have 4, 2. And if I plug those numbers into the formula, I get 2 minus 2 over 4 take away negative 3, which is 0 over, positive 7. And 0 divided by 7 turns out to be 0. So, things to remember from this one. The horizontal one is 0, and the vertical one is undefined. Another way you can remember this line, is that this line goes up and down, and undefined starts with a U, so up for undefined, but also undefined ends in a D, which would signify down. So that's another way that you can hopefully use to try and remember those. Now, if you were absent, you might want to actually practice doing these 4 questions that we did in class. Use that formula we talked about, label the points, so go along for each question and go x1, y1, x2, y2. Plug in the numbers and check what you get for the slope. If you pause the video, we'll talk about the answers in a second. So if you actually did this, and if you're doing this straight away on the calculator, you should put parentheses around the top and the bottom, and then the line here, you can use the fraction button or you can use divide. I actually went ahead and worked out the top and the bottom and then divided them afterwards just to try and avoid any careless mistakes. And just check to make sure you agree with those answers. Now, there is a way that you can try and remember all those slopes that we talked about as well. This is Mr. Slope Guy, and he has 4 components to him that help you remember these things. So if we look over this side to begin with, where we got our positive slope, you can see his eye is a little plus sign to signify positive. And if you look at his right eye, where you see this slope going this way, his eye is closed, which looks like a negative. Also from that picture, if you look at this part of the picture here, you can see the horizontal slope, which we just talked about, was 0, and you can see the 0 written there. And one more part to him is, if you look at his nose area, the vertical line here starts with a U, because that slope was undefined. So that's a summary. That picture is going to stay up in my class while we're actually doing this chapter. But try and learn the positive, the negative, the horizontal slope is 0 and the vertical slope is undefined as quickly as you can. And also at the same time, make sure that you learn those 2 formulas from our front sheet. So slope is rise over run, but also y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Also not specifically relevant for this, but we're going to be using these terms later, and as we're learning some vocabulary, let's add this one in here. So parallel lines, you've seen these before. I said they're like train lines. I was told train tracks for America, so things that run parallel to each other are going to look like that. The other definition is perpendicular, and perpendicular means it's two lines that intersect at 90 degrees. So look to see if that angle between the two lines is 90 degrees. If so, it's perpendicular. And we're going to review those terms of vocabulary in another unit as well.